All right, today we're diving into a really sharp and provocative critique of some Western activists who visited Cuba. Now, the source material does not pull any punches here, and we're going to break down its core arguments step by step. So right at the heart of this whole thing is this one phrase, safari communism. The source actually coins this term to completely reframe the trip, not as an act of solidarity, but as a kind of political tourism. You can tell right away this is going to have a deeply skeptical and pretty sarcastic tone.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to look at the stark contrast the source draws between the activists and the actual citizens of Cuba. Then we'll dig into its argument that this was all more of a performance than a real protest. And finally, we'll examine its theory about what was really motivating the whole trip.
Okay, so the entire critique is really built on this idea that there are two completely different Cubas. Let's see exactly how the source presents this divide.
Wow, okay, this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the activist experience. We're talking a 5-star hotel, working generators, luxury service. And then you look at the other side, what the source calls the Cuban experience. Nationwide blackouts, rationed food, and people literally trying to swim to escape. This massive gap is the engine that drives the source's whole claim of hypocrisy. And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures that sarcastic tone. It zeroes right in on the perceived disconnect between the mission, solidarity, and the super comfortable reality of the activist stay. The source then shifts from these big picture observations to something incredibly specific, represented by just this one number. So what's the story behind it?
And here it is. The commentary focuses on a pair of designer sunglasses, supposedly worn by an activist, claiming they cost $1,400. It then immediately frames that price as being 10 times the average salary in Cuba. It's using a single fashion accessory to symbolize this huge economic gulf between the visitors and the locals. So, the next part of the argument starts to question the activism itself. Was it actually genuine support, or was it all just a performance for an audience back home? This is the big question the source is asking in this section. It's suggesting that maybe the things they were doing on the trip weren't really aimed at helping Cubans, but were more about creating content and, signaling their own virtue. And the source uses some specific examples to build its case. We're talking about a performance by Irish rappers, a crowd chanting Free Palestine, and social media posts that it calls humble brags. It also points to meetings with Communist Party officials, which it claims kind of contradicts the whole idea of a grassroots rebellion.
Whoa. Okay, to really hammer home its point about the Free Palestine chants, the source uses this incredibly vivid and, let's be honest, pretty crude analogy. The point of this comparison is to argue that the chant, in this specific context of Cuba's struggles, was just completely irrelevant and misplaced. The source even makes up a new term for this, Commie Karens. It applies this label directly to the activist group Code Pink, basically defining them as people who go abroad mainly to criticize their own country, the U.S., instead of dealing with the local issues right in front of them.
So, if it was just a performance, then what was the real motive? Well, this next section dives right into the source's theory about the group's true intentions.
This quote really captures that cynical view, doesn't it? It completely dismisses the trip as this exclusive, curated tour, a theme park experience, all funded by some organization, instead of a genuine, grassroots effort. So the source's argument about motive really breaks down into 3 steps. First, it claims the trip isn't about real solidarity. Second, it says the real driver is personal ego. And third, it concludes that this ego is fueled by what it calls a hate for America.
And for evidence of this, the commentary points directly to a video from Code Pink. It highlights that the video is all about blaming the cruel, inhumane, barbaric policy of the United States for Cuba's problems, which the source presents as proof of the group's real focus.
And all of this brings us to the commentary's final verdict, a single label that's meant to tie all these different points together. This statement right here is pretty much the ultimate summary of the source's critique. It draws this very sharp line between believing in a political idea and actually having to live under the system you claim to support. The argument is simply that the activists are happy to experience it, but only as temporary visitors. Yeah, this slide just nails the final judgment. The source characterizes them as tourists who just engage on the surface. They fly in, they take their pictures, and then they leave, before, as the source puts it, reality eats them.
And so, this entire critique really leaves us with one central, lingering question. By picking apart this one trip, the source raises a much broader issue for activism today. When does a journey for a cause cross the line and simply become
Tourism?